Good evening, everyone. I'm Michael Dent.
And I'm Camryn Bowden. Thank you for joining us here at the regional desk in Studio B of the Lawrence Herbert School of Communications. Here we're going to give you all the latest information on the congressional, senatorial, and presidential race updates within New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania.
What's the biggest thing for you, both nationally and focusing, of course, regionally?
Well, nationally, of course, it's the presidential election, but that's an easy answer, so let's skip that. I'm looking more so at the balance of power within the Senate. Now, the Senate has a very slim Democratic majority right now, only 51 to 49 seats. And I'm really interested to see if the Democrats can maintain that hold. A lot of analysts are saying that it's likely not going to happen and it's likely going to turn red. But I'm very interested to see maybe there will be some surprises later on. Locally, of course, the biggest one is District 4 here in Hofstra University, D'Esposito against Laura Gillen. That's a big race that really could determine the balance of power in the House of Reps, the other branch of Congress that we're looking at. Yeah. Absolutely. That district, very much a swing district, if you will, switching back and forth between, candidates over the years. Absolutely. But overall, I think that all the races we just mentioned are hugely watched. I think New York 3 is another big one with Thomas Suozzi trying to, continue that incumbency that he has. And, obviously, District 17 is another one that's been highly watched, Lawler versus Mondaire Jones. And that spoiler candidate, Anthony Frascone, might be really detrimental to Mondaire Jones in the end. All studios at the Lawrence Herbert School are on fire tonight as we cover the 2024 presidential election. Our WRHU studios are covering the New York Islanders, but after this game, they'll be joining our multicast coverage. Don't go away. To start off with, let's look at the New York Senate results that we have right now. 33% of the votes are in, and right now Kirsten Gillibrand has a sweeping lead right now, 67% to 33%. This was highly expected. A lot of polling coming out in the early days leading up to the election with her at between 15 to 25 points above. Absolutely. And then our last race within the Mid-Atlantic region that we're looking at for the Senate is, of course, Pennsylvania's Bob Casey versus Dave McCormick. Right now, only 28% of the vote in, but Bob Casey does have a lead, 55% to 43%. Now, these Senate races are hugely important to the balance of power in Washington, and we are highly expecting for at least New York and New Jersey for some blue control right now. But again, too early to call any of these races for either of those candidates. And of course, Pennsylvania is going to take a lot longer to get through as we slowly have votes coming in throughout the days, weeks, and hopefully not months, but if necessary.
Passionate about that, but I want to move a little bit over to your home state,
yes, Pennsylvania, my state, as you mentioned. This is a race that I've been watching. Obviously, it's probably been watched by almost every person across the country at this point. This Senate race has been one of the, most money spent overall, but also it's one of the most important races. I mean, Bob Casey, he has been in this role for at least a couple 10 years at this point. McCormick is new. And overall, their policies in some ways are similar and in other ways are very different. They're both pro-life, which is interesting because Pennsylvania has a huge, emphasis on abortion rights. 50%, of people polled within a specific poll found that abortion rights was one of the biggest issues, if not the biggest issue for them, right? So having two candidates who are pro-life, with Casey being far more liberal about his, pro-life attitude, it's really interesting to see. You also have McCormick, who's very much a typical, Republican, typical conservative, supports big oil, funding more police, border security, all that kind of stuff. And you have, Bob Casey repeating a lot of those policies. I mean, more border security. He also wants to fund the police a little bit more. But he also is a little bit more liberal in some ways. He wants to cut down on corporate price gouging. He wants to have universal background checks for guns. He wants to support children to allow them, all equal opportunities within schools. Really interesting dynamics here where you have someone who is a little bit, right-leaning, but who's a Democrat, and then you have another person who's very right-leaning. We're going to head into an interview with Dr. Lina-Maria Murillo. She is the Director of Graduate Studies in Gender, Women's Sexuality Studies, and is a faculty member in the History and Latinx Studies at the University of Iowa. She joins us today to talk about the impacts you might expect surrounding reproductive rights on the ballot for the 2024 election. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
So our first question of the night, with the overturning of Roe v. Wade in 2022, reproductive rights and abortion rights are one of the most important issues, and for a large population this year. The two candidates have largely been at odds in terms of the issue. Vice President and Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris has really championed the issue, and I want to know, could we expect from her if she's elected?
Well, I think she's been very clear that she's hoping to actually return some sort of form of Roe. But I think activists, especially reproductive justice activists, are hoping that they go further than that, given that Roe wasn't enough, right? So even though we had 50 years of sort of constitutional rights to access to abortion, Not a lot of people necessarily had access because of financial constraints, because of state-by-state restrictions on access to abortion. And so I think that it seems to me that what she has proposed is in many ways kind of the floor. And what activists hope to do is to push her to go further and push their states to go further and to offer more forms of reproductive care, including access to contraception and abortion.
Now, Dr. Murillo, former president and Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump has largely been avoidant on the issue of abortion rights, sometimes painting it as a religious issue, at other times it's a states' right issue. What kind of impacts might we see on abortion, with Trump this election season?
Well, to be frank, he doesn't really have any legitimate position himself. For many years, he was a Democrat and he was pro-choice. It wasn't until he started to run for office that all of a sudden he changed his tune. But the people that he surrounds himself with, they very much have a vision for a total denial of any kind of reproductive care in the United States. And that is, putting forward a complete ban on abortion, a federal ban on abortion, and certainly weaponizing the Comstock Act of 1873 that remains on the books in the United States today, as it was put forth by a man named Anthony Comstock, who's in charge of the U.S. Postal Service in 1873. That's right, the 19th century. And this man was vehemently against ideas of allowing people to possess and distribute what he called, quote unquote, lascivious materials, or anything remotely connected to sexuality, pornography, and also materials surrounding information around contraception and abortion. And so people in Trump's administration have come forward to say that they would weaponize the Comstock Act and use that federally to ban access to contraception. And that would be from the pill to condoms to IUDs, right? So with the Trump administration, we're seeing not only a complete ending of access to abortion, but probably some very dystopic ideas around access to contraception writ large.
Here in New York State, abortion rights are on the ballot in the form of the Equal Rights Amendment, or Proposition 1. Could you tell us a little bit about what this proposal might mean for the state if it's passed?
Well, I think that, it's a way in some ways to take seriously some of what former President Donald Trump has said, right, that the issue of reproductive rights should return to the states. But of course, if there was a federal ban, then the state of New York would likely have to take its new law. They would probably be sued, and they would have to go to the Supreme Court. And we all know what the Supreme Court looks like at this particular moment. So even as states try to enshrine any modicum of protections for their residents, if Donald Trump returns to office and the people that he has surrounded himself in the past, and by that I mean folks who helped write the Project 2025 from the Heritage Foundation, and others who are for the most part Christian white nationalists, their idea is that people should not have access to any forms of reproductive care, and surely there should be no basic kinds of rights for people that are not in heteronormative white relationships. And so I think that what we're, not to put too dire, sort of underscore this in too dire ways, but we are on the precipice of a very fascistic looking government, federal government, with the support of the Supreme Court.
Thank you so much, Dr. Murillo, for joining us today to talk about this ever-important issue. Yeah, I know Bob Casey is a pro-responsible fracking, candidate, and I know that Dave McCormick is a very big oil guy, as a lot of people say. Would you say that those, two dynamics really are going to benefit the candidates?
I feel like it shifts the whole kind of perspective on the issue to the right. So if we have two candidates that are pro-fracking, then we're going to have to see how either party sells the issue in that state and how much people know about that issue and are concerned about things such as drinking water that have been previously big news items about the issue of fracking. So.
Absolutely. I mean, we were waiting for some of those results to come in, 0-0 for the longest time, and now we're here, and it's really confirmed what we were thinking. We were thinking it was going to be a Lolota sweep, and right now, with 63% of the votes in, Lolota has that strong lead, that strong 10% lead over Aflon.
Looking at Lolota, I was wondering, what is it about him? Is it the fact that he's a Republican, or is there a specific policy that is so appealing to those first district voters?
In my opinion, what Donald said really resonates with me. It's Trump country. The far east end of Long Island, it's Donald Trump's territory. And if Donald Trump comes and endorses you, I feel like it's just going to be beneficial overall. And I really think that's why Lolota has this 10-point margin right now. Sure, Holden. One of the biggest issues that Pennsylvanians tend to cite is the problem of fracking and the issue of fracking, whether that be a positive thing or negative thing depends on the voter. But could you talk to us a little bit about what you think the candidates' policies surrounding fracking, have really impacted voters overall?
Yeah, I think with Harris, even though she has said in the debate and in recent years that she is not against fracking necessarily, her previous comments had been used by the Trump administration in a lot of political ads. And she had said in the past that she was not for fracking. So that could send a mixed signal to voters in Pennsylvania or in any other state in that sort of situation.
Absolutely. Slight bump up there, 1% extra from the last time we checked in with District 1. Let's move over to District 3 with Tom Suozzi and Michael Petrie. We are going to be able to see whether or not Suozzi's able to maintain or has been able to maintain, that lead that was largely seen as we were going into this election. And as we started seeing polling results coming back, it really looked like Suozzi was going to maintain that. So we'll take a gander at some of those results right now. Right now, 54% for Suozzi, 46% for LaPetrie. Definitely a really close margin there, quite similar, if you will, to the Lolota Avlon, but obviously switched around with the Democrats maintaining a majority of the margin, within District 3. On top of that, there's so many things that still come up to play here with the Senate races, with plenty of House races still up for grabs within Pennsylvania, within New Jersey, and there's still plenty to be seen in New York. For Hofstra Votes Live, I'm Camryn Bowden.